Hey there guys, I'm Long Lost Daylight, and if you've been on my channel before, you might have seen that a few months ago I reviewed the film Project Hail Mary. Since then, I've had the opportunity to read the book that it's based on, and I just wanted to make this video comparing the two and just sort of seeing what I found different and what was interesting between the two versions. Although this video won't be completely spoiler free, I'm going to try and keep it fairly vague, so if you haven't seen it, this video could still be for you. Anyway, I'm just going to try and get right into it, and I want to start with things that they changed between the book and the film. The first thing that really stood out to me is there's a lot of scenes from the book that were cut from the film. This is including like flashback scenes and like present day scenes on the mission. And because of that, we lose out on quite a few side characters. However, I'm going to say I think this makes sense. Film as a media has quite a tough runtime constraint compared to books. For example, like the original cut of the film was 3 hours and 45 minutes before scenes were cut. Plausibly, they just couldn't have included every scene from the book, and yeah, I understand that. Similarly, quite a lot of detail from the sort of into the science, maths, and technical processes in scenes didn't make it into the film. And again, I understand why they did this. As a Hollywood film starring well-known actors, it's gonna have a much wider audience than the book it's based on, especially since it's got such a low age rating. I think these changes were important to keep the film accessible to that wide audience. Now, I am going to go into a little bit of a tangent. This is an interesting point that I noticed while reading. In the book, it's explicitly said that astrophage has mitochondria, DNA, and it has a comparable respiration cycle to Earth life, which is really useful because it means they can research it. However, this implies that life on Earth shares a common ancestor with astrophage. This is also discussed in the book, and it would have migrated to our solar system at some point. This is similar to a theory called panspermia, which theorizes that life on Earth originated from interstellar microbes that were introduced by meteors or space dust. It's an interesting theory, one I don't personally like, but anyway, enough on that. Indirectly, this implies something interesting. At the moment, the predominant theory about how stuff like mitochondria arose is through something called endosymbiosis, where a smaller cell was integrated into a larger host. Mitochondria have been evolving alongside their host cells for billions of years. The probability of two molecularly similar outcomes after 2+ billion years of isolation is so low it might as well be zero. This implies that DNA and mitochondria existed before Earth life and astrophage split from their common ancestor. However, there's evidence that life on Earth has existed for around 4 billion years. This statement in the book retcons about half of that, suggests that bacteria evolved from larger, more complex cells and just ditched their organs, and invalidates most of the early fossil record. Genuinely, this isn't a criticism of the book, and I found it really funny. It's just a very ballsy world-building choice, if intentional. Now, I'm going to move on to a couple of things I wasn't as keen on in the book, and for that I'm going to circle back to what I said earlier about some side characters. Although these side characters in the book are quite fun, I've noticed that a lot of the time they relied on stereotypes to build character. The Russian characters are loud and drink vodka. A character who's a climate scientist gets described as a hippie, which, I mean, stereotypes can be useful in character building at times, but it was just a shame to not see them more fleshed out as characters. And I recognise this is a limitation of books as a medium. A visual media like film can convey a lot of personality in a short amount of time through visual cues like body language, tone, facial expressions, and a book would have to sort of take longer to share these details in writing, if that makes sense. As another note on characterization, if you watched my original review video of the film, you might remember me saying this about the character of Strat. I think it would have been very easy to fall into the trap of her being very cold and antagonistic, which unfortunately is the way a lot of women in authority tend to get portrayed in media. But the book does fall into this trap. Strat is quite cold and abrasive in the books. Obviously, this is a completely valid writing decision, but I personally found her character more compelling in the film because of the conflict between the kinder aspects of her personality and the decisions and actions she's having to make. Throughout the book, there's a lot of detail into scientific procedures, calculations, and technical processes. This is really interesting at times, but I'd argue that sometimes it does get pushed too far. A high level of detail in something tends to convey that it's important, and sometimes the science isn't the most important thing happening in that scene. So at a few moments in the book, it would have been more interesting to have some more detail of what Grace or other characters are feeling rather than just what they're doing. And I'd argue that some scenes and sequences have this problem to the extent that they start feeling like filler. I know there was already a film adaptation deal before the book was completed, and part of me does wonder whether that contributed to fewer scenes getting cut from the book, so there was more material for the film to draw from. Ultimately, a detailed description of a computer system rebooting doesn't really do much for the reader. In the book, there's actually a lot of foreshadowing for the Talmiba leak, and a lot of explanation for why it would be bad before the main leak happened, as in the main scene that made it into the film. However, I think the film achieves the same explanation a lot quicker, and I actually think the lack of foreshadowing and detailed explanation actually makes this line,
"Rocky ship is built of xenonite,"
hit a lot harder and get a stronger reaction from the audience. Overall, I think I'd say the book and the film bring a different creative ethos to the same core story, with the book placing a bigger emphasis on science and discovery, and the film choosing to highlight the emotional weight of the events of the story. Both are valid, and both are interesting to read and watch. The changes and cuts made by the film do make sense, and a lot of them were just necessary for adapting the story effectively and keeping the runtime at a reasonable length. I personally preferred the film over the book because I really enjoyed the film's emotional depth. But again, both versions are great. And genuinely, it pains me to say this. As a kid, I was very dedicated to the book was better than the film club. But yeah, if you've read or watched either version and you've got any ideas that are different from me, let me know in the comments. It'd be really interesting to hear. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like or subscribing. I have actually opened a Ko-Fi page recently as well if you'd like to support me or buy an art commission. I hope you can join me next time for the next video. Until then, have a lovely day or night wherever you are. See ya!